Halloween is one of my favorite crafting themes, so of course I'm so excited to share some more Halloween inspiration using some of the stamps and stencils from the Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous Fall Halloween Curation. In my last video, I created a spooky skull card with lots of inky layers. For this card, I'm continuing with the inky layers, but with a different spin on things, including a twist on distress ink smooshing that gives you a lot more control, especially when you want to combine multiple colors. I'll also be adding in some stenciling, heat embossing, and more. Now let's get into it. So for this card, I'm using some of the stamps and stencils from the Stampers Anonymous September Curation with Tim Holtz, where they're just reminding us of some of the older stamps and stencils designed by Tim that are still available. And the theme of this curation is Halloween and fall. So a lot of the stamps and stencils have a fall Halloween theme. I, of course, love Halloween, so that's kind of where I started when I began the making of these. And for this card, we're going to be using the Shatter stencil. And then some of the stamp sets I've got here is Haunted Mansion, Mini Halloween 3, and the Halloween silhouettes. Now, if you are not wanting to do a Halloween themed card, they also have the Thankful silhouettes, which definitely has a fall Thanksgiving theme to it. So you could take these same techniques and apply them using maybe this stamp set instead, or for that matter, any kind of larger stamp set could be used, because I'm going to be using this for the background. And so any kind of a stamp that you might have that's similar to this would certainly work. And then these are just going to be used to do a little bit of some stamping, and they could also be used for the sentiment for that matter if you'd like. And then along with the stamps and stencils, I've got a couple of dies I'm going to be using. These are the Tim Holtz Sizzix Haunted House and Vault Halloween, and I'm using these little ghosts from this die set to go with the haunted house, and I'm using some of the bats here, but these ghosts are kind of repeated multiple times in different die sets, so you could certainly use those. You could also switch this out and use any other kind of a silhouette shape to create kind of a similar embellishment that we're going to be creating on this card. The mediums I'm going to be using on this card are some black soot archival inks, but any kind of permanent ink will work for this. I've got some embossing ink and white embossing powder. And then I've got a variety of distress inks in pumice stone, peeled paint, rusty hinge, dusty concord, and black soot. Again, because I'm going with the Halloween theme here, these are the colors I've chosen, but if you wanted to do a fall theme, as I mentioned, you could easily switch out these colors and create that sort of a theme. And then the paper I'm going to be working with is distressed watercolor cardstock and then just some plain black cardstock. As far as replacements for the watercolor cardstock, just any kind of watercolor cardstock could be used, or just some sort of paper that can handle wet mediums. All right, so for this next card, we're going to start off with some ink smooshing, and I'm going to use a slightly different technique than what I've used in the past. I came across a video by NB on YouTube, and she was using this smoosher that she made, and basically it's just paper towel and plastic wrap, and then you can kind of tie this together with whatever you want. I just put a little bit of tape there to hold it together. I will have a link to her video so that you can check it out. And yeah, so I've got some watercolor cardstock here. I'm working on the smooth side, and some distress inks and my distress sprayer. So then I'm just going to start off with smooshing the ink pad onto my craft mat, adding a little bit of water just to get that ink flowing, and then I'm going to take the smoosher and use that to pick up the ink and then adhere that to my paper. So it just kind of gives you a little bit more control with the ink smooshing, if that's something that you like, versus, trying to smush this into the ink that's already on your craft mat. So we'll clean that up, wipe off our smusher. And if you want to dry that in between, you can. I'm going to leave it wet. And now we're going to do some same thing with some rusty hinge. And obviously more water will make the ink more runny. But I feel like it just gives you a lot more control of where you're putting the ink, especially if you're wanting to kind of have multiple inks on your background. And then the last we'll do a little bit here with the peeled paint. And kind of smush it in there. And she has them in different sizes that she's made. So you could do that if you really want to get even more control of where you're putting the inks. But I don't know, love the effect that I'm getting there with this. And then from here, we'll just give this a quick dry. And I just really love, like I said, the separation of color that you get by doing this and the control you get with the ink smushing versus how I typically show it where you smush the ink pad onto your paper, add the water, and then dip your paper into that ink. And I don't know, just another option another way to play with your inks. All right, so I'm just gonna place my paper here onto a sticky mat, and I'm gonna take the Shatter stencil, and we're gonna do a little bit of some stenciling over this background here. And I'm gonna take a blending brush with the same color of ink that we just used, and I'm gonna ink through the stencil. So the areas that are rusty hinge, I'm gonna apply rusty hinge through the stencil. So it's just gonna darken it up a little bit. And I'll do the same thing here with the Dusty Concord. I'll do the same thing with the peeled paint. You'll see when we peel this up here, you just get really cool effect, and you can still see that inky smushed background that we created. So I'm gonna flip this over and kind of do that same thing here on this side. And if you peel it up and you're like, oh, I want it a little darker, then just go back and add a little more ink. But I'm pretty happy with how that looks. And then now from here, we want to make sure this ink and everything is super dry. So you can let this sit to the side to dry, or you can dry it with your heat tool. And the reason we want it really dry is we're going to do some heat embossing. So if you saw my previous video, you'll know that this is kind of similar to what I did, because I did some heat embossing on that background with some white embossing powder. And we're going to do that same thing here, but we've kind of done it with a little bit of a twist. Here we did a slightly different techniques underneath the heat embossing. And so now we're going to, instead of using a stencil, we're going to use a stamp. But that said, you could do this next layer with a stencil just like I did in that video. So if you missed that one, I'll link up to it down below. And again, if you want to add just a little bit of, if you want to do a little bit of an anti-static over this, you can, just so you make sure you get, or only get the embossing powder where you want it. And I do have to say, this is the Rabbit Hole Designs anti-static tool, and right now, this is my new favorite one. I find a lot of the other ones leave like this powder behind that impacts my design, and I can't seem to clean it off, and especially if I'm working on a darker paper, and this one just seems to be less of that. So I've been using this one a lot more lately. All right, so we've got our paper ready to go, and now we're just going to ink up our stamp with some embossing ink. Now I put down a little bit of some temporary adhesive underneath here so that this won't move around, but I'm going to add just a little bit more. And I'm going to probably stamp this a couple times to make sure I get a nice, good impression. So let's stamp that again. I don't want that paper moving around on me. Okay, that should do it. Now we're going to take that and we're going to take some white embossing powder. You can use whatever color you wanted though, like if you wanted to do black or purple or whatever you might want. Silver. I just kind of wanted a subtle design on the background here. And with all this said and what I've done here so far, you can do the stamping and heat embossing first too, and then do all this other stuff on top, because the embossing powder is just going to act as a resist. It's not going to take the ink. So, like I said, you could do that first. And then I'm just going to heat emboss this with the heat tool. Now, if you aren't into Halloween, you could easily switch out this technique and do it with a fall theme using like the Thankful Silhouette stamp set, which is also part of the September Curations collection. You know, and then just switch out, use different stencils, different colors to give yourself more of a fall theme. And just like we did on the previous card, I'm going to ink the edges of this with a little bit of pumice stone, just to give it a little bit of a edging. And then again, with a little bit of that black soot, just to darken it up just a little bit. And then if you wanted to bring that pumice stone more onto the center, just to kind of give it even more of like a kind of a vignette, you can do that. And then what you want to do is just take a damp rag, so just spritz it with a little water, and you can just lightly rub that over the surface, and that will remove any ink. So if you were to do the heat embossing first and then do the ink smooshing and the stencil work, just do this same step at that point too. Just wipe that off. And then your background is ready to go. If you wanted to add some splatters, you could. I added some machine stitching to the edging for the final card design, and then layered this onto a piece of black cardstock. So now we're going to create one of the embellishments for the card, and I've die cut a piece of distressed watercolor cardstock using the Haunted House die. Again, any die would work. This like more of a silhouette type image that where you've got some solid spaces will certainly be the best. And then from there, I'm just going to take some different stamped images and stamp them onto the background here. Now, I am not going to really use the stamp platform other than just to hold my stamp in place here. It's the first thing I grabbed. You could also do this on a sticky mat. And as you notice, I just rubbed the ink pad over the stamp because I'm not going for a really dark stamped image. I just want kind of a light image like that. I'm using archival ink, again, a permanent ink, because I don't want this imaging to get runny or anything. So I'll add a little bit more there. That was a little bit darker than I maybe would want. But then you just grab, so I've got the Haunted Mansion stamp set, and this is the Halloween mini set 3. So I'll add a little bit of some script here. And just kind of fill in some of these other little spaces there with that. So you can just kind of play around, use whatever other stamps you might have. You know, if you want a little bit of a filigree, this is a good image here. So we'll just rub a little bit of that on. And there. Just kind of get what's left. There we go, perfect. So this is really just to add a little bit of interest to the design. You could certainly cut this out of pattern paper or stamp whatever kind of stamps you might have. Like maybe you already have some Halloween stamps, so you just use anything you might have there for that. Just add a little bit of color to this. We're going to ink smush it with some black soot distress ink. So I'm just going to smush some of that onto my craft mat and spritz that with some water. And black soot is a light black, really almost actually more of a gray color in the distress inks. So it's not going to cover up that stamping that we just did. So I'll just give that a dry. If you want to make it a little darker, you can re-smush it after you've dried it, because then those inks will layer and kind of build up and get a little bit darker. So I'm just going to smush that again, get a little darker on there, and then give that another dry. You can see it just slightly darkened it. Like I said, the black soot's not a dark black, especially in the distress inks and with the ink smushing, because you're adding water, so that's going to kind of dilute the color a little bit. If you wanted to make this a little bit darker, you could ink blend over it, and you would still be able to see some of the stamping unless you kind of kept layering and layering it and making it super dark. But I just wanted kind of just that light gray color again, just to have a little bit of interest. And then from here, I'm just going to ink the edges with a little bit of pumice stone. There may be a little bit of some other brown on here from previous usage, because I don't clean my blending tools. I kind of reuse the same ones in the similar color family. So gonna ink a little bit on the windows there. And then to finish this off, I took a piece of distress watercolor cardstock, inked it with some fossilized amber distress ink, and trimmed that down and put that behind the windows. So it's just one piece that I made, and then just kind of trimmed off the excess, so it covered all those windows. And then I cut another one of these from some black cardstock and then layered all those together, kind of offsetting that black one to add just a little bit of a shadow to the die cut. The other embellishments that are on the card are some bats and ghosts, and the bats are from the Haunted House die set, and the ghosts are from the Vault Fright Night set. If you want to add the ghosts, you can, or not. You could add a die cut moon to the background. You know, you can kind of embellish this and create your own little scene. And then for the sentiment, I just used a Happy Halloween stamp and added that onto a piece of white cardstock that I distressed the edges just a little bit, inked it with some pumice stone, and mounted it onto some black cardstock, and then finished off the card with that. And here's a look at the completed Haunted House Halloween card. I really love this twist on ink smushing for creating colorful, controlled backgrounds. It's a great alternative when you don't want the colors to get too muddy. If you missed my last video where I made a spooky skull card with collage stamping and inky layers, I'll link it for you here so you can check it out. Stay tuned, because I have one more Halloween project coming your way soon using the Fall Halloween Curation, plus some fall themed ideas you won't want to miss. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you gave it a thumbs up and subscribe for more crafty inspiration, tips, and techniques. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, stay crafty, my friend.